Zack Snyder is a name that is very well known in Hollywood, and you might love him, you might hate him, but you cannot deny that he has put out a lot of top tier quality over his career. But now his latest film with Netflix, Rebel Moon, has arrived with disastrous review scores. I have a few different things that I want to show off, but before we get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, follow me on social media, and consider supporting through Patreon or via YouTube memberships. So I wanted to start off with this Forbes article. It says if you work in content production at Netflix right now, you are looking at a DEFCON 1 level event when it comes to the initial reception of the massively expensive blockbuster Rebel Moon. Now, this is something that was, of course, announced a few years ago. Zack Snyder, over the years, has been so excited about this project. He has boasted about how massive these movies are going to be, how big he wants the IP to be in general, and I love seeing someone be passionate about their work. But when it comes to Zack Snyder's work, passionate raises a lot of red flags because he is someone who goes above and beyond with his work and tries to throw everything at the wall in hopes that it will stick, and it really seems like he did that with this. Now, last year at Summer Games Fest, which I did live stream, we got the first big trailer for this movie, and it really left everyone rolling their eyes and scratching their heads a little bit because it seemed like it was going to be a cluster F. Now, what I mean by that is that you have guns and lasers and explosions and ships and all these different races of people and all of these different outfits and cultures, and you had all of these giant landscapes. Like, it seemed like they really tried to make it the flashiest trailer possible, and they at least left a lasting impression. And we all had a lot of questions about Rebel Moon, what it was truly going to be, but now the critics and users who have seen it early are definitely not in agreement, but they are in agreement that it is not the best movie ever. It says Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, Child of Fire, has critic reviews rolling in, and they are extremely bad. Now, you guys know I never trust critic reviews. I never trust critic scores, so of course take all of this with a grain of salt, but the critics right now are, the all critic is at a 23%, but the top critic is at a very, very suspicious 0%, okay? A 0% makes me think that something here is off, and I know there's people in the industry who don't like Snyder or his fans, but a 0? Virtually no movies deserve that. You are telling me that this is the worst thing you've ever seen, that this is just a movie that should not have been created at all whatsoever, and there was no redeeming qualities, not a single thing. I personally just don't believe that. Now, when it comes to these audience scores, they are also not scores that you should fully trust, because the catch is the fact that this had a limited theatrical preview, and, you know, initially I would think that these were Snyder super fans because it's a new IP, so there's no existing audience, but even they're not rating it extremely positively. I mean, a 73 is not a 0, it's not the equivalent, but it's also not great. These people don't hate it, but they're at least giving it a believable score. Like, I could see a 73 on basically any movie, even if I think a movie is trash, and go, okay, you know what? I understand that it's got redeeming qualities. I do, though, believe, judging by the 73, that yes, it does probably too much. I only skimmed some of these right there. It says that there are over 500 ratings at this point, but I did skim a lot of these reviews, and it does seem like, you know, it doesn't have a lot of established characters because there's such a large cast. It does too much. It's got a lot of problems with storylines connecting and being just a coherent piece of content, and the stakes are too small with these characters. But I just can't believe that it really is a zero, worst movie ever created. And of course, it does not launch until next week, so I will watch it and then decide for myself. I mean, look at Army of the Dead that released in 2021. It's a 67 critic and a 75 audience, which ultimately, yes, is right around what I expect from Zack Snyder. Nothing that deserves a 100, nothing that deserves a 0. So I do think that my audience, or my score, will be right around what the audience will say, but I just don't think that any movie really truly deserves a 0. And yes, this is a problem with Zack Snyder, is he does throw everything at the wall, and then the project becomes to be too much. You know, knowing Snyder and knowing how the Snyder Cut came out, on top of him trying to introduce a new universe into movies, seems rough. And it does seem like, judging by his track record of work, it could be a clusterfuck, and we don't know in reality, and we won't until it officially releases. But there's something just a little bit odd, I think, going on with these scores. It is also important to point out that this movie was originally, it sounds like, supposed to be one 4-hour long experience, but it is 2 parts. So we probably also need to see part 2 to get the full scope of the story. But even if it's split in half, it's gotta either, have good or bad visuals, good or bad pacing, basic things that you can judge if it's decent or not, even if you don't have the full story. I mean, the Snyder Cut was 4 hours, and Netflix was probably like, you're not releasing a 4-hour movie on our watch, but we'll let you create it and then cut it in half. So even if this part 1 comes out, it'll be some time until part 2 releases in April. There's going to, I'm sure, be a lot of questions, but the ending, yes, could be, a major issue here as well, where they decided to cut it. But yeah, I mean, these critic scores are just very suspicious. So 23%, a top critic 0. I think a big thing here, and you will see this if you read all of the reviews, is that it is being directly compared to Star Wars. I mean, this movie was actually originally pitched as a Star Wars movie, and then Disney decided they didn't want it, so Zack Snyder decided to shop it around, renamed characters, changed locations and story elements. But many of the larger critics loved the recent Star Wars trilogy and many of the shows they've put out over the past few years, and many large critics are reviewing this. Not that, their career is solely based on Star Wars succeeding, but they want Star Wars to be the only Star Wars-esque product on the market. These scores, to me, just read as they're desperate for Star Wars to kind of be the number one, and for this to fail. And then you have to add in the fact that a lot of these critics absolutely hate Zack Snyder, again, hate Zack Snyder's audience. I think he has created some pretty decent content over the years. I'm not saying that he's my favorite director or anything, but at the same time, I just don't believe that this deserves a 0. I mean, it's not like it's a low budget movie that they tried to shove a lot of stuff into. 166 million for 2 movies is a lot of money, but it's not like they bet the farm on it. It's not like it was an astronomical amount of money for Netflix to give them. I'm sure they were looking for their next major franchise to replace Stranger Things as it's winding down, and then to go against Disney Star Wars, since that this, again, was actually written as a Star Wars story that Disney declined, which brings up a problem with this: who the people are reviewing it, like I mentioned. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and read all of the critic reviews, but you can very quickly see their stance on it. A lot of direct comparisons to Star Wars, a hugely expensive but uninspired Star Wars knockoff with some thrilling action sequences. Snyder mistakes exposition for world building. It's a film populated by some of the Justice League Snyder Cut filmmakers' worst impulses. I thought that the Snyder Cut looked pretty good visually. Yes, there were some major issues with it, like the pacing was off at times, of course. That every character had their, 5-minute slow-mo shots, which pulled the movie down a lot. But it just does seem like the critics are giving it no credit at all, which I haven't watched it. I will watch it next week when it releases, but I do think that it's probably going to deserve somewhere in the ballpark of that 73. Only time will tell. I will be keeping my eye on these scores to see if they, increase, if they decrease. Well, the 0 can't obviously decrease, but the audience score can. But we will not know the full picture of this movie until it releases next week for us all to watch. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this and of course found it important and informative, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you didn't, make sure to give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I will talk to you all again in the next video really soon.